Right. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my colleague, Ms. Gudra, our CEO, and our co-host, Her Excellency, Ms. Geeta Kamath from the Australian High Commission, welcome to all of you for joining us in this, we hope, very special webinar. Just to give you some very quick background, the reason that we put this together, most of you will know that ENS has for the last 20 years, during the mining indaba, in the Tuesday luncheon slot, had a luncheon in our Cape Town premises where we've been very fortunate to have had some very illustrious speakers. The President has graced us twice, the Minister of Public Enterprises, and this year with the COVID restrictions, clearly we couldn't have the normal luncheon, so we decided, together with our co-host, the Australian High Commission, which we've been very privileged to have co-host us over the years, we thought of this webinar where we would ask probably two of the most important CEOs in the country, whose organizations will have most impact on the mining industry, to be kind enough to join us and to give a 20-minute address each as to their organization. Andre de Ruyter, I'll introduce in a moment, Eskom and Transnet, and we thought this would be a good idea for this year's event. So we're all going to be very strict on time, and I'll start off by just introducing our co-host, Her Excellency, the High Commissioner from Australia. Geeta has a very illustrious CV. I'm not going to read the totality. She previously served overseas as Deputy Head of Mission Paris, Ambassador to UNESCO, a non-resident ambassador to Chad and the Central African Republic, and had an earlier posting in Singapore. In Canberra, she has served as Assistant Secretary of Africa Branch, Agriculture and Food Branch, and Domestic and Legal Branch, as well as a Director Arms Control Section. Geeta holds a Bachelor of Arts and Laws degree from the University of New South Wales, a Graduate Diploma in Legal Practice from the University of Technology, Sydney, and a Master of Arts, Foreign Affairs and Trade from the Australian National University. She is admitted to the Supreme Court of New South Wales as a legal practitioner. I'm going to ask Geeta to just give a short word of welcome, and then I'll introduce our two guest speakers and Mazie, and we can try and make this as punctual as can be. The one, I'm grateful to all of you today. It's the one occasion I've had, perhaps one of the only ones this year and last year, to wear a tie. And I've been missing my tie and suit. So thank you for coming to this event, putting up with my tie and suit. I'm really feeling good about it. Geeta, over to you.
Thank you very much to ENS Africa, Chairman Michael Katz, Chief Executive Mazie Magudwa, for continuing this generous tradition of co-hosting with the Australian High Commission this annual event held during mining indaba, this year for the first time, as Michael has mentioned, in virtual format. I actually remember last year's lunch very well. We heard about South Africa's economic reform agenda from Minister Pravin Gordhan, who noted at the time the emerging impacts of COVID-19 and what a year it's been for all of us since then. As the largest single country foreign investor in South Africa's mining sector and a top 10 investor overall, Australia has a stake in the South African government's economic reform agenda, and we're committed to supporting the COVID-19 economic recovery. I believe that the biggest contribution and asset we have is actually our people. With South Africans now the 7th largest foreign-born community in Australia. And I know this includes some of you who are listening in on the webinar today, and we're keen to see how we can leverage these connections to improve outcomes for both our countries. So having heard from Minister Gordhan last year, I think it's now very fitting that we hear from the CEOs of two of South Africa's most important public enterprises, Eskom and Transnet, whose operations have direct impacts on energy and transport costs and processes in the mining sector, both in South Africa, but also in other countries in the region. So thank you again, Michael and Mzee and ENS Africa, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Thanks so much, Geja. Before introducing our speakers, I just want to mention Mzee's role. After our two speakers have finished their addresses, and as I mentioned, they will be 20 minutes each, Mzee will analyze their talks and then take questions until about 2 minutes to 2, and then Mzee will thank our speakers and our guests. And once again, thanks to all of you for giving ENS your time during this Mining Indaba week. So to Andre and Portia, thank you very, very much. When I asked them if they would participate in this, both immediately and graciously said yes. So I don't want to waste time. Let me quickly introduce, perhaps in the order I have it here, Portia Derby. Portia Derby is the current Group Chief Executive of Transnet Limited, appointed in February 2020. She has occupied senior positions in the South African government during a period of major economic reform. Portia is the former Director General of Public Enterprises, which she served from 2005 to 2009, responsible for corporate strategy and structure of the investment portfolio, 2004 to 2005, and former Chief Operating Officer of the Department of Trade and Industry. During her tenure as Director General of Public Enterprises, Portia provided strategic direction to state-owned companies. Portia's career in government started at the National Institute for Economic Policy as a financial researcher, where she played an integral role in working on the quantification of the Reconstruction and Development Program. She was also part of the founding team of the National Investment and Trade Promotion Agency and later became its Chief Operating Officer. She has previously served as a non-executive director of Metair Investments and Safcol. Portia also worked in the private sector as an executive director, Clients Africa at Orcon, an international engineering and infrastructure advisory company. In that role, she was a key driver of the client strategy on the continent, serving on the company's South African Management Committee and the South African Board. Portia holds a Bachelor of Science degree, majoring in economics and geology, an honors degree in economics from the University of Natal, as well as a master's in business administration from the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. So we really do have an illustrious speaker. If you permit me 1 minute on Andre's. Andre has an equally inspiring CV. Over a 30-year period, Andre has utilized his skills in trade both locally and internationally in various portfolios in the energy space. He has significant experience in managing coal, oil, chemical, and gas businesses, including marketing of export coal to international utilities and taking responsibility for the operations of very large coal and gas conversion plants, including electricity generation. Andre's experience and expertise cuts across a range of disciplines, including but not limited to strategic leadership, commodity sales, manufacturing, production, economic finance, and corporate restructuring, legal and regulation, people management, socio-economic development, corporate knowledge, governance and risk management, knowledge of global markets and business operations. Andre holds a variety of degrees, a Master of Business Administration from Nyenrode Business University in the Netherlands, a Bachelor of Law LLB, which he obtained from the University of South Africa, as well as a Bachelor of Civil Law and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Pretoria. Thanks again to Portia and Andre. I don't know how you want to play, who's opening bat, who's first drop, but Andre, would you want to start?
Right, Michael. I will start. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and apologies for my lack of sartorial elegance. Unlike you, I don't miss my tie, so it's good to be in a rather less formal environment. It's one of the benefits of lockdown, I guess. Without further ado, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity of presenting. I will now share my screen and then move straight into the presentation that we've prepared for this particular event. So if we can, for some reason, let's just see, I'm not getting my screen is suddenly, oh, there we are. Right, so clearly Eskom is a very important partner from both a supply as well as a customer perspective with the mining industry. We are, as Roger Baxter of the Minerals Council always likes to say, joined at the hip. We are in business together in every possible way, and we therefore have a vested interest as Eskom in the success and growth and sustainability of the mining industry. So we understand that our lack of reliability in terms of electricity supply has created uncertainty in the mining industry, and we are therefore taking some significant steps to improve the reliability of our system, but also through our corporate restructuring, creating the ability to add more capacity to our grid, and in particular enable that capacity to be brought online for companies, including mines, that want to self-generate, and I'll elaborate a bit more on that. Now, the less likely part of the presentation to find acceptance with you is that the current tariff is not supportive of greater self-generation. So you will have seen that we are restructuring our tariff to have both an energy as well as a capacity charge, and this is to cater for the fact that we are essentially increasingly acting as a giant battery to those people who are self-generating, and there's a cost attached to having that capacity available. And then what is also very important, of course, is that our coal costs have been escalating very significantly. We've recently reined that in somewhat, and got that under control, but still coal is a very important part of our cost base and is likely to remain that for a very long period of time. So let's talk about capacity. And we have some real challenges in terms of capacity. And the waterfall graph on the screen right now is very important to explain this picture. We have a nominal nameplate capacity that's installed of about 46,000 megawatts. Now, at any given point in time, we have about 11,000 megawatts out on unplanned maintenance. This is due to the lack of reliability of our system. Then we're also doing about 5,000 megawatts or 10% of planned maintenance. And then there are various issues related to coal quality, ash dams, and so forth that deduct another 2,000 megawatts. So effectively, of the 46,000 megawatts, we've only got available, including our diesel generation, some 28,000 megawatts. Now, in terms of the IRP19, we are going to retire about 10,000 megawatts over the next decade. And that leaves us with a very significant shortfall, which needs to be supplemented urgently. Now, if I move to the graphic on the right-hand side of the slide, it's clear that if you look at our technology options, the technology selection is such that the timeline during which we have to bring this new capacity online effectively forces you to make the capacity selection yourself. Solar clearly is going to play an important role, wind just in terms of timelines, and then natural gas, I believe, has a very considerable role to play, and we really would like to explore what opportunities there are for us to repurpose some of our existing coal-fired power stations to natural gas, bearing in mind that there's a very significant capital cost saving that can be leveraged as a result. New coal and new nuclear, while we are not against those options, just from a time perspective, if we were to start building those today, they would only come online in at least a decade from now. And therefore, we've got to focus on those technologies that can bring electricity onto the grid as quickly as possible. So we strongly support all efforts to bring additional capacity onto the grid. The 2,000 megawatts by June 2022, which has been announced by both the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy and by the President. That should be online by the middle of next year. And then there's a further 11.8 gigawatts of new generation capacity. But we believe that, in fact, more is required in order to bridge this gap, bearing in mind that the nameplate capacity of renewable energy is not the same as the effective available load factor that can be generated, purely because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. Now, we would like to open up the network. We think that there's a strong opportunity here for us to increase the license limit from 5 to 50 megawatt for own generation, so-called embedded generation. And we are keen to work with potential suppliers in this regard. A recent survey done by Chris Yelland and Meridian Economics has indicated that there's about 5,000 megawatts of capacity that can be added to the grid based on this change in licensing regime. Obviously, there are grid requirements that need to be met, but in principle, we think that this is a great opportunity to unlock own generation capacity, and we stand ready to engage with our customers pending a change in the regulatory environment. We also want to partner, as I've said, to repurpose our aging fleet and undertake targeted projects that we believe can rapidly unlock existing capacity using existing infrastructure. Compared to a new greenfields gas-fired electricity plant, a repurposed coal plant can create a saving in capital cost of between 30 and 35%. So clearly, we've got assets that are ripe for repurposing. And then again, the flip side to this is that in order to make Eskom financially sustainable, make sure that we abide by the user pay principle, we need to migrate to cost-reflective tariffs. We have put processes in place to ensure that we can promote and assist self-generation. We will help customers to the extent that that is required. We will ensure that the processes are dealt with expeditiously. And we obviously, where there are restrictions in terms of the grid, we will put measures in place to ensure that we can invest to ensure that the capacity can be brought online as quickly as possible. And we refer you to our website in this regard If you've got 50 or so megawatts that you'd like to feed into the grid, please give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. We think it's a great opportunity for us to together resolve the electricity crisis in South Africa. Now, this is quite an important slide to talk about the financial sustainability of Eskom going forward. Now, the narrative is often heard that Eskom's tariffs are unrealistically high and that they've increased at a rate that is very substantially above the rate of inflation. However, if one were to recalculate the average Eskom selling price to US dollars cents per kilowatt hours, it is clear from the graph on the left-hand side that, in fact, electricity tariffs in South Africa have remained flat, and they have not even kept pace with US inflation. And this is particularly relevant for this audience, many of whom are exporting into dollar-based markets. So if you have a dollar-based commodity that you are selling into the international market, it is not unrealistic to expect that your cost base should also be in some way linked to the US dollar. And this is made even more true in the case of coal, where increasingly the Eskom price of coal is related to an export parity price. Similarly, if we compare, and this is work done that recently by Dr. Ulrich Minnaar, in terms of industrial prices, it's very clear that South Africa's electricity tariffs are significantly below its peers in international terms. So the narrative that is out there that South Africa's tariffs are too high, I think is first of all incorrect. And secondly, it creates a situation where the utility as it is today is not financially sustainable and in fact has a debt burden that poses a risk to the sovereign. Now, the shortfall in the tariff decisions that we've had over the years has contributed to this very substantial shortfall in revenue, and that has exacerbated our debt situation to the point indicated in the right-hand graph here of some 450 billion rand where we are today, where we are effectively borrowing money in order to pay the interest on the debt that is due. So clearly, if we want a sustainable utility, the tariffs have to change to a measure of cost reflectivity. Now, before you object to say that the electricity consumer cannot be expected to subsidize Eskom's own inefficiencies, we concede that point immediately. We expect to be paid an efficient cost reflective tariff, i.e. tariffs that can be justified in terms of international benchmarks. Where we are inefficient, we as management take on the challenge of managing down our cost to ensure that we are competitive from an efficiency perspective. Now, we understand that if we were to migrate to cost reflective tariffs immediately, that would create an untenable price shock to the economy. And that is not desirable at all. Also for Eskom, because we would end up in a situation where grid defection would accelerate, but also where some of our customers would see very severe pressure on their electricity bills. So therefore, we think that a more moderate approach to successive increases of 15% per annum, followed by inflation-linked increases subsequent to that period of adjustment. Now, we believe that this will create price path certainty, which should enhance investor certainty in what the likely cost of energy is going to be going forward. But there are ways in which we can mitigate some of these impacts that are undesirable. Nobody likes a price increase, least of all in the middle of a global pandemic. And as I've said, we would strongly support the raising of the licensing cap from 5 to 50 megawatts to allow consumers to self-generate. We think that there is a strong case to be made to remove the existing 8 billion rand a year subsidy that goes from industrial and mining customers to other users. That will offset some of the pain that comes with a tariff increase. For the indigent user, we think that there's a strong case to be made to increase the free basic electricity from 50 kilowatt hours per month to 100. And then we would like to encourage energy users to become more energy efficient, and therefore we would advocate the reinstatement of Section 12L of the Income Tax Act. And then finally, for those energy intensive users that are distressed by price increases, we would be willing to enter into negotiated price increases or price agreements to mitigate the impact of these price increases. So the headline numbers may look tough, but we believe that in a considered and targeted way, we can mitigate the pain in a way that still secures Eskom's future as a viable and sustainable business. Now, what does that mean in terms of our international competitiveness? If you look at the average Eskom tariff today, it's clear that we are among the lowest in the world. If you look at the average tariffs, which include municipal markups, that's slightly higher, but still very low. And then if we implement cost-reflective tariffs, we would still be certainly in the lowest third in terms of electricity costs globally, based on a US dollar cents per kilowatt hour benchmark. And this also includes some African countries. You see Kenya, Rwanda, but also some of our major industrial competitors globally. So we think that these increases are not unrealistic and they are not unreasonable, given the alternative, which is to rely on continued taxpayer subsidies to enable us to pay our interest bill. So together with the mining industry, we would like to find areas to optimize in order to protect the economy from the impact of further costs. We are far and away the biggest customer for coal in South Africa, 61% of the market. But if you look at the rate at which coal prices have been increased, it is clear that we have beaten inflation by some margin. And that, of course, leads to cost pressure, which again leads to a demand for high electricity prices. And unfortunately, in this case, one can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have expensive coal prices as well as low electricity prices. The two are inextricably linked. So in conclusion, and I'm trying to adhere to my time limit here, we are making efforts to support the mining industry, and we remain committed to enabling this sector to grow and to thrive. We think that by adding capacity to the grid, by implementing a new tariff structure, we will have an electricity market that is sustainable, but that is also competitive in global terms. Bearing in mind that the cost of unreliable electricity is always higher than the cost of reliable, cost-reflective electricity. And for those of you who have backup generators running on diesel to power your mines or your plants, you will confirm that it is significantly more expensive to run backup electricity than it is to get power off the grid. We think that investor confidence will increase as a result of price path certainty, bearing in mind also that if Eskom cannot recover its cost of capital from the current tariff, there is a very low likelihood that any private investor will be able to recover its cost of capital from the current tariff. So if we want to attract substantial new private capital to electricity generation in South Africa, cost-reflective tariffs will go a long way to enable that. But finally, I would like to invite all our counterparts in the mining industry to work together with Eskom to find opportunities to optimize our costs and together protect, nurture, and grow the South African economy. Thank you very much, Michael, for the opportunity, and also thank you very much to Her Excellency, the High Commissioner.
Andre, that was superb. It's everything that we had in mind and more. So again, thank you very, very much. Portia, can we ask you kindly to...
Thanks, Michael. So I'll try to be efficient as Andre was, and thank you very much for the invitation from yourself and the High Commissioner of Australia. Valis, if we can have the presentation, please. Will you make it full screen? So thank you for the invitation. I'm trying to sort of like have a sense of, okay. We've tried to put together a couple of slides to just give a sense of the direction in which we're planning to be moving as Transnet. COVID, as you can imagine, and especially those of you in the mining industry, has actually had quite a tough impact in terms of volumes and productivity right across the system. If you can please go to the next slide. And you recall that last year with the lockdown, when the hard lockdown started, we had, for a while, Transnet was not regarded as an essential service. So it took us a day or so before we were declared, which means that we had a few days where we were basically off and had to restart the engine. Fortunately, we were able to get back on track quickly, and we, for the first almost half of the year, we had 50% of our people working. So it's been a tough year, and you see it in our results. We've announced our 6-month results in September last year, and it showed. And in fact, we still worry about the remainder of the year. However, and it's in this context, basically, that we've had to think about, so how do we ensure that, Michael, as I think I agree with you, I don't think Andre and I are the most important executives. I just think that we run two seriously important enterprises for the South African economy. And the sooner we get them back on track, the better it is for the whole economy. But it is important that actually we act in concert with the rest of the private sector. So one division of Transnet, and this is the only reason why we put up this slide, that most people have not, which was not divisionalized, which we've now actively divisionalized, is the Transnet property portfolio. We've got a couple of iconic buildings, Carlton Centre, and there's Adderley Street in Cape Town. The intention is to actively use these assets to leverage and to help our balance sheet going forward. But also, most importantly, some of our properties locate themselves in important city centres. And we've made the decision that we will reinvest in the city centres wherever we have our properties, and we'll move back so that we rebuild urban centres for people. And in fact, if COVID is teaching us, is that outdoor open shopping areas are the things to go back to. And if you can go to the next slide. So as Transnet, we continue to focus on 5 areas, and we've agreed that we will focus on these 5 areas for the next 5 years. They'll start to change towards the latter part as we make progress. The one area which I have to say we were weakest at, and quite a lot of effort is going in that, is into building capacities in the area of safety. Our cost compression exercises continue. We, like Andre, have to deal with a lot of people who are of the view that we're way too expensive. I didn't cover that in this presentation, but I think it's an area that we will continue to elucidate on going forward. You would have known in the recovery plan, the president indicates that there's going to be an increase in the number of private players in our system. So we wait to see what will arise, but we are definitely getting ready for whatever competition might present itself. If you go to the next slide, a large chunk of our operations, we depend on mining commodities. About 80% of our revenue comes from those 8 identified commodities. Now, it's interesting that for an economy which actually should be pushing in the direction of manufacturing, autos is quite a small part. And remember, autos is the core representation of South Africa's manufacturing capability. And thank God it's one area that is growing, but we need to be able to leverage that because it's the one sector that creates the jobs for the people that we have. However, the mining sector is absolutely clear, and you would know, it remains a really important customer of ours. What we've spent the last couple of months doing is reviewing how we do strategic planning and how we prioritize inside Transnet to ensure that we run our strategies and look at our operations, looking at commodity flows and the directionality of those various commodities. If you go to the next slide, this is just an indication of our view of what will be happening to the various commodities. You'll see autos is really important at 7% of GDP. However, it's one of those areas that we have to do quite a lot of work to ensure that we're able to move them as efficiently as possible, where it's a tough market to be in. It runs also on one of the hardest corridors to run, which is the NATCO, between the theft and the cable theft, which is actually quite appalling, as well as the underinvestment on the rail. It's a key priority of ours for the next couple of years, is to focus most of our investments in TFR on just the network, because if we fix the network, we would be able to get close to using the current installed capacity, which is around 250 million tons per annum in the system. Coal, unfortunately, and I think all of the coal executives see that, we see that it hits a cliff around 2030 or so, where it will come down. So what the plan is we continue to run the operations to ensure that we meet the 81 million tons per annum. However, one of the things that we're doing, have been looking at, is how do we consolidate our export channel for coal so that we improve efficiency, but also we increase our partnerships with the private sector in this area. If you can go to the next slide. On the next slide, we start to show some of the strategic approaches or some of the ideas that we have going forward. In iron ore, the current capacity on the Sishen Saldanha is about 60 million tons. We think if we are able to get the environmental approvals through from the Department of Environmental Affairs at Saldanha, we should be able to increase export by 67 million tons per annum. There's a lot of hard work being done, but that the additional 7 million tons per year we have to use to ensure that we bring in all of the emerging players, the juniors who are in the sector, who have been fundamentally squeezed and haven't been able to get in properly into this space. Manganese, we've made the decision as per the department. We're migrating manganese out of PE and we're going to consolidating Mucha and have another, and the plan is to increase our exports from Saldanha. We need the Department of Transport to approve that decision, but we've already started having conversations on that. I've already indicated where we're at with coal. Chrome and magnetite, really interesting, and our 2 ports that we want to optimize and the routes that we want to optimize is Richards Bay as well as Maputo. I'll indicate a little bit more because I think I'm quite excited about the developments around Maputo. Autos, we've indicated, very important sector. And if we are able to move autos well, it means that we're going to be able to move even agriculture better than what we have historically. Agriculture, we have a lot of business with it at the ports, but we're also increasingly looking at how we might move a lot more agricultural production on rail going forward. And then PE, we've indicated, and it will be in the news soon, Ford's been talking to us about wanting to use PE Port as their port for exporting vehicles. So a lot of work is going to ensure that we increase the capacity on the line to be able to move both manganese as well as vehicles to PE. The investment in Durban for autos will stay. and we will be strengthening the capacity there as well. We are in every single area looking for increased private sector participation. The issue of gas, we have the Lily pipeline, which runs towards Richards Bay, which currently is leased to Eskom, not to Eskom, sorry, Andre, to Sasol. That comes to an end soon, and we've got to make some important decisions around whether we re-sleeve, resize it, and then change, reverse the flow, so that we can use that as possibly LNG import. But we are a lot more interested in watching what emerges with the hydrogen economy. So, Andre, when you make the presentation about nuclear, I'm quite interested, because I do think if you're going to deliver a truly carbon neutral economy fast, frankly, you are going to have to see a little bit more hydrogen than gas in the system. But I mean, it may be a contentious point, but that's for another debate. If you can go to the next slide, please. So maybe I'm even going to move fast through this one, because we've already, this is basically what we've done. And if you look at the map on the left-hand side, we've, on the rail side, we've looked at and we've in some of the same sort of corridors, but we've renamed and reorganized to a large extent. And one of the big things that we've done is that the TFR executive, that's Transnet Freight Rail, executive, is no longer headquartered in Joburg, all of it. The exco of Transnet Freight Rail is located all over in the operation. So we've got Mandisa in Richards Bay. We've got Tuma, who's located in Durban. Lloyd, who is out in Saldanha. Russell, who is out in PE. Basically, what we've done is that we've located them, moved them to the operations so that we can improve decision making. And also, one of the big shifts is also ensuring that there's a greater delegation of authority to all of those individuals. On the next slide, I hope it's the one where we start discussing some of the engagements that we've had with CFM. The port of Maputo basically is a service port to South Africa. 70% of the commodities through there come from South Africa. So what that means, and we recently, towards the end of last year, went and had a discussion both with the port as well as CFM. And I think we've come up with what a long overdue agreement between ourselves and them is to look at how we might be able to operate the corridor as a pit to port operation. It gives us for the first time the possibility of looking at trains as bonded warehouses, so which would enable us to fast track our movement through the border posts to the port. There are teams who are working together between Transnet Freight Rail, Transnet Engineering, and CFM to see how we might make this real. And in this coming financial year, we should see some serious progress in that direction. And we'll be also looking at how we might be able to participate on a more active basis inside the port. But we will revert with this in the fullness of time that will be available. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is basically what I've indicated. So a lot of the regional activities that we want to focus on, chrome, definitely a target from Mozambique, and coal, definitely looking to consolidate ourselves around Richards Bay. And hopefully we should be able to enter some dialogue with the RBCT coal terminal to see how we might better even utilize the existing capacity. Investment efficiency is actually essential for the whole of South Africa, because then if we were able to arrive at a sensible arrangement with RBCT, it means that we would use our money to make investments in other areas where we think there are other growth opportunities. Next slide, please. So one question that we have to ask, and so I'm not going to give too much detail on this because it's progressing fast, is that when we've looked at what's happening to port capacity on the continent, there was a while, a few years ago, we were the biggest container port, Durban was on the continent. We're now number 3. And all we are saying is that if you look, we've got a port which has already got capacity of 8 million TEUs, which is way ahead of our biggest port, container port, which is Durban. And the strategic decision we've taken is that Durban must become our hard port. And we've got to move fast to get beyond the 8 million tons that you already have. And we'll be coming out and making some very clear proposals around we proceed in this area. You're the mining industry, and so you understand that we must make sure that we talk in detail and make sure that our unions come along with us. Otherwise, this could be really difficult. But we believe it is absolutely essential that we find ways and means of ensuring that Durban becomes the genuine hub port for South Africa, efficient, meeting global standards. When you understand there's a lot of investment that we must put into there in terms of capital as well. Next slide. So this is my, I think, penultimate slide. One of the big questions that we've been saying, so if you look at the first block where you see Africa almost completely blocked out, is that there is no direct link between South Africa and China. And we think it's important because China remains the world's manufacturing hub, basically. And we think it's about time that we found a way to directly link. And so one of the issues that we'll be coming out with is we want to move fast on implementing an old strategy, it's not a new strategy, of seeing Ngqura as a transshipment hub, which links these routes directly, the direct link between ourselves and China. This is in the stages of being further developed, but all we know is that if we are going to be able to be competitive as a South African economy, we need to have a port which is large enough, which can take large vessels over 14,000 TEUs. If we did that, we know that the shipping costs go down substantially for South Africans. And our estimations at present is that we would reduce the shipping leg by between 20 and 30%. Secondly, if we had a proper transshipment hub in Ngqura, we know that we'd be able to get additional manufacturing coming to our shores. And then we would like to be a server to look at SADC as a market where we could be able to run smaller vessels from our ports like Durban going forward. Next slide, please. I think the next slide is basically my concluding slide, is that a large focus that we have going forward is that we're looking for investments which, frankly, to deal with our current balance sheet, we need investments that bring back immediate and short-term returns. We want to partner with the private sector, but it's also partnering on a fair and equitable basis. We've started having discussions with the Department of Transport on what's the underlying tariff methodology, given the fact that there's a new economic regulator who's coming into the scene, so that we ensure that there are appropriate cross subsidies between the various sectors and the activities that we have to move on our rail network. We have an extensive network in South Africa. It's important that we maintain it. At the same time, we have to do this whilst ensuring that we comply with the PFMA. We need to ensure that we use our procurement on a sustainable basis to rebuild manufacturing to the extent that it is possible, and also to ensure that there's actually benefit for the continent as well. So really look forward to engaging with you more, and you'll find that what we're trying to do is to have a much more responsive Transnet, maybe I hope better able to take criticism here and there, but also, you know, we engage, we don't shy away from the market. But thank you very much, Michael. And it was fast, but I hope it gives a sense of the direction in which we are going as Transnet.
Portia, that was superb, as I say. You did exactly what we wanted, and again, a lot more. I'm going to now hand over to Mazie. Mazie's going to take some questions and then thank the guests. Mazie, over to you.
Thanks very much for that, Michael. And perhaps before we plow into the questions, I should point out to you, Michael, that I'm glad that I can still count on you despite operating from a distance as we are. And the reason I say that this time is, you know, when you started reading each of the impressive CVs, starting from Gita's, and then you went to Andre, and then to Portia, I was worried there for a moment you might embarrass me and start reading my CV. So thank you that you didn't go there. And then before we plow into the questions, I'm mindful that we are running out of time. We're slated to finish at 2. So there are a number of you that have posted questions on the chat forum. I'm going to ask, I'm going to start with you, Andre, and just pose 2 of the questions that we've received. And then Portia, I'm going to give you the last word. But before I ask, I pose the questions, just one observation from my end. And that is, all of us are aware of the economic and other challenges that the country and the continent has faced in a pre-COVID world. And all you do by throwing in COVID into the mix, you simply escalate all of those challenges quite exponentially. And Portia did make the comment that yes, Eskom and Transnet aren't necessarily the 2 most important actors in our economies. But certainly, I'm sure both of them will agree that between the 2 entities that they're in charge of, they are 2 of the far more important entities for the mining industry, for the country, and dare I say, for the continent, in how all of us start turning around our economic fortunes going forward, and especially in a post-COVID world. And so, yes, I will still thank you separately at the end, but I think your insights are very useful into us and into helping us understand where we might be taking this mining industry and where the direction that the country might be facing, quite frankly, given how you are proposing to navigate your challenges. And so to Andre, the first question that we have is, does Eskom, how do you properly benchmark, no, the question reads, to properly benchmark, we need to properly understand the kind of utilities in the markets you refer to, and whether or not those entities, like RSA, have a central energy supplying entity. For in the first world, there are multiple utilities, each with their own infrastructure that is not necessarily connected to supply common customers. So that's the one question. And then the other question, Andre, is you are asked to please expand on your thoughts about how those selling commodities in USD should be exposed to USD inflation. Are you saying mineral producers ought, I think there's a word missing, to more than other SA electricity consumers, or what do you have in mind? And then Portia, I'm going to ask you your 2 questions separately as soon as we have the answers from Andre. Andre, over to you.
Great, thanks, Mzee. I'll try and be brief. So South Africa is transitioning to exactly the same type of electricity supply industry and market that we see all over the world, where you have multiple generators of electricity. You typically have a limited number of transmission grid operators, in many instances limited to only 1. It's your classical natural monopoly, as economists would call it, and then you have multiple distribution companies. Now, the unbundling exercise that Eskom is currently embarked on is intended to enable exactly that we can attract more private investment in generation capacity. We will have an independent transmission system and market operator in the transmission grid. And then over time, we will see greater competition also being introduced in the distribution sphere. And that, I think, is part and parcel of the longer term future for our industry in South Africa as well. So I think that greater competitiveness will increase greater transparency and cost, but it will also create market clearing tariffs that hopefully will be regulated with a light touch in order to enable proper competition, including intraday competition in terms of time of use to take place, so that customers can have the opportunity to buy from their chosen supplier, particularly, of course, those bulk users such as the mining industry. Then I think as far as the second question is concerned, I think having some experience in the commodity export business myself, the notion was always that the rand would depreciate faster than your costs would increase in terms of South African inflation. And in many instances, this has held true. And that has created an artificial rand hedge for many of our South African companies who produce and export dollar-based economies, or who produce and then sell on an import parity basis in local markets. Now, if you only rely on that as your business model, and your only bet is on the rand to depreciate at a faster rate for whatever reason than the rate of inflation would indicate, then I would submit that you don't actually become more competitive over time. And therefore, my contention would be that it is indeed fair to attribute some of the input costs, including electricity costs, on a dollar-denominated basis if you sell your products into dollar-denominated markets. And the reason why I say that is that very often we get told that our electricity tariffs are not competitive compared to certain other jurisdictions. And I think this is where we need to get the reality of the exchange rate built into the equation in order to also make sure that we don't have, as a mining or an industrial strategy in South Africa, cheap electricity prices subsidized by the taxpayer based on a fast depreciating rand, but actually built on energy efficiency and global competitiveness. Thank you, Mzi.
Thanks very much for that, Andre. Portia, the two questions for you. The one is, can you comment on your plans to concession ports and the timelines for this versus the government's focus on corporatization of the Ports Authority, which seems to complicate your efforts? And then the other one is, would you consider increasing private sector use of rail? And if so, what are the issues to consider there?
So I think something that's actually often not understood. There are about 99 terminal licenses in South Africa, incidentally, and we only have 16 as Transnet port terminals. Sure, the two areas which are our space only is in containers as well as in autos. However, as your audience will know, is that there's increasing containerization. And so we anticipate that there's going to be quite a lot of pressure from even the bulk guys to start, and even the multipurpose terminals to start looking at how they might use some of that space for containers. So that doesn't require us to concession anything for that matter. Do we need some help in terms of building, especially the point that I was making is that around Durban, the need to respond to ensure that we fast get back our space as being number one and being a serious player is something that we are definitely looking at ensuring going forward. So that's the one. The other, I just want to clarify, we are not saying we will build capacity of 91 million tons or 81 million tons on coal. That's the total commodity. We look at the corridor from rail right out to the port, and we don't care who owns the terminal. All we're saying is that that's the total capacity that we have, and that's what we will continue to support. We don't support a growth beyond the 81 million tons, because as we say, not so far we should see a sudden fall in demand, or in demand globally. Now, next, the other issue around, we think that there definitely needs to be increased utilization of the rail system. However, we're clear about the fact that we need to make sure that the system is maintained at a level that there are slots that are available for private players. So we've already started the process of separating commercially our operations from the track, so that we can start having a sense of what's the cost of the slot and the use of a track going forward. And as that evolves, that creates the room for additional participation on the system. But let me assure you, the space is extensive. And then the last thing, we have a responsibility to our workers as well. So we would be starting discussions, and we've already started talking to our own unions around how we ensure that our bargaining council is a bargaining council that's open, that allows new players to come into the space. Because obviously, if you're going to compete with us, you compete with us on an equal footing. And Z, I'm mindful of the time, so I'm happy to stop at this point.
Okay.
Would be happy to take the questions that were given for us to respond at a later point.
No, I'm very grateful for that, Portia, because what I did have in mind, without promising too much to the audience, is for those of you who've left us your details when you ask the question, because I see a number of you have asked the questions anonymously. So where we have the details, we'll pass on the questions to our panelists and then try as best as we can to get you the answers. So thanks very much for that, Portia, and thanks to you, Andre. And I suppose that brings us then, we are 5 minutes post our scheduled time. So very briefly, by way of thanks, the first group of people to thank is the organizers for the webinar, to Otsile and his team, and the technical crowd that put all of this together, all seamlessly without any glitches. So thanks to all of you. And to Michael for the very kind words at the beginning, and also for your leadership in steering something of this kind, our first in the virtual world. So thank you for your leadership on that, Michael. Gita and the Australian High Commission, in all of the 20 years that we've done this, I think the vast majority of the time has been with yourselves. And for this inaugural one, that has been virtual. Thanks once again to yourselves for coming to the party. Promise you, whatever the world looks like next time round, we'll still be looking to yourselves to partner with us. And then to Andre and to Portia, we know the kind of pressures and demands in your time. So thanks so much for giving as generously as you have in the last hour or so. I will, as I promised, still lean on you to answer some of the questions. So I thank you, but I still reserve some small amount of work for you afterwards. And then finally, to all of the attendees, there's nothing more debilitating than putting together an event and then no one shows up. And just looking at the number of participants, I think it's the best attended of all of these sessions that we've ever had, including in a real as opposed to a virtual world. So thanks to everyone for participating. And you can rest assured we have in mind to put together more of these kinds of sessions. And I suspect it may not be the last time you're hearing from Andre and Portia for future occasions too. So thanks to everybody, and the session is now closed. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.